and welcome to another Cover One Buffalo special edition here tonight with a friend of the show, Benjamin Allbright. You know him from KOA Colorado, his lovely interactions on the Twitter machine. Ben, how we doing?
Doing all right. A little under the weather, but otherwise all right.
Appreciate you toughing it out with us here tonight. I wish we were speaking under different terms. I wish one of us was watching the team we cover getting ready for the Super Bowl here, but alas, that is not the case. But there have been some interesting interactions here with our two lovely franchises, not the least of which the Bills' new coordinators moving east from Denver to Buffalo. So Pete Carmichael, obviously previous connections with Joe Brady in New Orleans and their time together there, and that kind of Peyton tree coming over here. And then not any obvious connection, but a super highly respected up and coming name in the defensive ranks with Jim Leonhard. Why don't we start a little bit with Pete Carmichael? I know there was some thought, would we see something along the lines of uh, a Davis Webb type situation, or, obviously they talked to Grant Udinski, Nate Shieldhouse, some of the other up and coming names. I kind of thought once it was announced that Brady would maintain the play calling, it'd be obviously really hard to pluck any of those guys who are already in a situation of, game planning under a play calling head coach. I didn't expect that. So then when it flipped, I actually threw a guess out there that Carmichael was a name that made sense. What are your thoughts on kind of that transition? I know he was kind of in a senior assistant role, Peyton's longtime offensive coordinator in New Orleans. Where do you see that one lining up as a kind of veteran voice in Joe Brady's ear?
Well, I mean, if you go back and you look, the season where Sean Payton broke his leg, and then the following season where he was suspended, were actually Drew Brees' best, most productive runs with Pete Carmichael running the show. So something to kind of keep your eye on with that. Pete, of course. For those who don't remember, Pete Carmichael is actually the guy who developed Drew Brees in San Diego. It was him and Brian Schottenheimer, and then Pete went on to
Is
New
that
Orleans.
different from Mike McCarthy developing Joe Montana? Or is it?
Yeah, yeah. No, Pete and Brian Schottenheimer really did develop Drew Brees back in San with the Chargers, and then Pete when he came to New Orleans, Sean Payton was trying to bring in Tony Romo, and that fell through. Dallas wouldn't let him leave, so they pivoted and went after Brees after that, and Brees failed his physical in Miami, and so the rest is history there. But that's how that
The
worked.
sliding door Saban moment there and everything.
Right. Yeah. 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 So that's how that ultimately worked out. Is that Pete Carmichael was the reason that a lot of that happened. And if you go back and you look, Brees's best seasons, honestly, were when Pete was running the show more so than Sean Payton. So take that for how you will. As for the rest of it, yeah, I think he'll be great. I mean, obviously, he's a previous working relationship with Joe Brady. They were both there in New Orleans. I think that'll be good for Buffalo. I think the main thing is that you guys don't have a ton of receivers that really fit sort of that mold. So this might wind up being like a wide receiver heavy draft or offseason for you guys in terms of that from the offensive side of things. I think Cook will shine in that offense because it is multifaceted. They throw a lot to the running backs, and if you're a multi-tier running back, you will absolutely you'll love it. So Cook will probably love that. In terms of the defensive side of things, I mean that's I think what everybody wants to know is the Jim Leonhard stuff. But on the offensive side, I think it's a pretty good hire.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of people underestimate how important that role is because when you have the role of head coach of the organization, you have time in a lot of different rooms. That focus of the individual game planning, what the plays are in the playbook that make the most sense for that week's matchup, all of those different things. Having a veteran voice, a guy who's done that before, that can help set up that menu for Brady on game day when he's kind of taking that mantle for the first time, I think is super valuable. So I was very excited to see that. I think there's also, if you're betting on like, hey, let's assume this does work. Let's assume Brady is the right hire, which again nobody will know until we see it. I like the idea of sustainability, that you're not necessarily putting somebody into that OC role that might get 1 or 2 years out of until they get a new gig. I don't mind the role that, if this works, Carmichael's going to be there for a minute. He's not going to bounce to some other role. So I like that one.
Gives you a senior advisor too, right? It gives you
Yeah.
somebody on staff who's been around the league a while for a young head coach. That's going to be a valuable tool.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So yeah, with the news of the day, the more recent hire here, going back to back, dipping back into that Peyton group here. You have Jim Leonhard, a guy who was super well respected, and I thought a great hire for Vance Joseph and Peyton to pull Leonhard from being the defensive coordinator there in Wisconsin. Obviously, multiple stops along his career, two of those stops in Buffalo as a player. That kind of try hard guy working his way through a 10-year career, and then a really well respected run here as a coach. Was the passing game coordinator with the Broncos here. Maybe tell us a little bit about what his role was with Van Joseph's defense here, and then what was aligned. I think there's a lot of things. You had a good tweet with Sal Capaccio talking about, there's a lot of terms like multiple and versatile that are probably more applicable here than some 1990s 4-3 versus 3-4, like, everything's a five-man front. There are some pieces here that, we don't have a Nick Benito. We don't we don't have a couple of the pieces that we might need to really execute this. But tell us a little bit about what Leonard's role was there, and then maybe a little bit about what to expect in this defense as we transition.
Well, if it, I mean, a lot of what he did had to do with the secondary there in Denver, which of course he's a noted secondary player, so they're not too terribly difficult to kind of ascertain that a little bit. Broncos safety play has been very good since he's been out here. He has improved that. And he's been a part of helping to shut down opposing passing games, which if you've watched Denver's defense over the last couple of years, it's that's what they do. I think the best way to say that is just that he's had an overall hand in everything. He's not the decision maker, that's Vance Joseph, but he's had a hand in a lot of that, and he was kind of the lieutenant on the defense as far as that kind of stuff goes. For people looking at what kind of defense you're looking at, I think there's a lot of assumptions that are made. I think that most people saw that reply to Sal, but who's a good dude. But I think really what you need to know is that using terms like multiple and versatile, that's all nebulous. That doesn't give you anything, right? It just says things are good. The reality is that it's a lot closer to something you guys are already familiar with, which is Wade Phillips.
Yes,
It's a lot
yes.
closer to what Wade Phillips runs than anything else. There are certainly aspects of it that are evolved from what Wade used to run, but a lot of what it is at its core lines up kind of as a 34, but it really plays as a 43 in terms of the upfront rules. One gapping versus two gapping, stuff like that. And then how they do things. Vance Joseph, for his part, loves to use that bubble backer, that B, that the inside will, whatever you want to call it, and he likes to use that as the sixth guy. You're right. That guy's going to blow up the B gap once they get double teams on the front guys. The edge guys are going to be the edge. The front guys are going to be the front, and that's your front five. That sixth guy, though, is going to be a linebacker who's got to be able to both go sideline to sideline in the run game and come downhill and get after the quarterback. And for us, that was Alex Singleton. There were times where he's going away from the ball, but that really is not his strength. And I would suggest, I don't know that you really have that guy on your roster right now. I've seen some guys that could sort of do that. I suspect that you'll go out and get a player that played for Jim Leonhard at Wisconsin, in Leo Chenal. I suspect he'll be on your free agent list. So keep an eye on that. If they get a chance to get Zach Bond, another guy who played for Leonhard, that's another guy who potentially could be in there. But as far as the front seven goes, that's really what you're looking at. You're looking at edge guys that play in sort of almost a mush rush style. You're going to look to contain first, and then you're making your move. The front three are there to tie up the front five blockers and get double teams on them. Sometimes they'll get through if you got an engine guy, which you do. I mean, you got you got Eddie there. You got guys who have
Yeah,
the engine to get there. Like Zach Allen, does for us.
yeah.
And so I think that's the front seven. On the back end, it's going to be a lot of cover one. Now there'll be other coverages in there, but cover one is kind of really what they start with. It's not all man though. There are different rules. Like there are rules where if they get inside leverage, the whole thing shifts to zone. It's more complicated than it looks. And what I will say is I don't know if Jim is necessarily going to lift what Vance does, but a lot of what Vance does takes a few weeks to kind of click. And you go back to the Broncos' first season with Vance's DC when he came back, and of course, I think everybody remembers that 70-pointer against Miami. They had a lot of backups in, but it takes a minute for that stuff to connect. And then once it starts to connect, it really picks up steam, and then it's really tight. And he did the same thing in Arizona. Vance did. When he was down there, took them from a worst defense in the league to top third of the league. The Broncos are top five in the league, and I think Leonhard will do a lot of that. You go back and you look at what he used to do at Wisconsin. There are elements of that. So I think what you're going to see is kind of a modern Wade Phillips defense at its core, and that's probably the best way to put it. One quick note about Jim Leonhard, though, I will say, is that Jim has a keen eye for talent. He really does. As a matter of fact, the reason that the Broncos drafted Pat Bryant is because Jim Leonhard tipped them off to him because he was on that Illinois staff for a year and saw him there. And so Jim Leonhard has a pretty keen eye for talent. I will say that.
We'll take any help we can get. I think you look at some of our existing personnel, there's going to be a lot of questions. I think Deion Walker can play kind of a Keanu Benton style nose tackle, not your traditional. He's not a Vita Vea from that standpoint, but has, a different skill set there that, it's funny. He's bigger than DJ Jones or Malcolm Roach, but doesn't play the exact same in that stout way. He uses more of that first step for penetration, but we've seen that work in some of those. Ed Oliver is the same weight as Zach Allen. Allen's a little bit taller. We're really curious how that's going to work as he kind of moves out to that role and how he can, hold up in a 5-eye where that may work. And that's an interesting one. Some questions on Gregory Rousseau. Is he more in that line? Does he take advantage of, he has his measurables are like a Calais Campbell, but he's always played more outside. Does he now lean into that and keep that bulk going that way? Does he try to play more outside when he certainly isn't, a Benito from an athleticism, but maybe a Cooper like that. That's not far off from that standpoint. He's a little bit bigger, but probably closer in a comp there. So we'll see where some of those pieces go. There's going to be a lot of questions. Like you said, there's not an obvious fit in that downhill guy. That is some of the skill set we've seen from a Dorian Williams or a Joe Andreessen. Maybe there's, a little juice left in Shaq Thompson, but that's not anything sustainable for any of those guys without a huge breakout from one of those other guys that doesn't appear to be in the card. So, like you said, there are some obvious ones out there, Leo Chenal and Bond from the Wisconsin days. There's also a couple of guys here that are pending free agents for the Broncos. And I know obviously there's some space there in Denver and some opportunity and probably desire to bring some guys back. But when you look at, both Singleton and Sternad from a linebacker standpoint, PJ Locke and Jonathan Franklin Myers, we know JFM well from the Jets days, and he's the more recent addition there, but guys who have been there for a little bit. Let's start a little bit with PJ Locke. That's one I'm curious about because he was more of a third safety to begin the year, but then ended up needing to step in and start and played well. That might be a guy that next to Cole Bishop, if it's, obviously let's assume it's even money because money always talks. If somebody throws a bunch of money at somebody, that's an easy decision. If it's even money, could you see him wanting to go for one last shot to start for a Jim Leonhard defense? Or do you think it's going to be tough to get him out of Denver and not finish his career there?
Well, let me back up a minute first. Let me go back to the Deion Walker thing you said because that's
nice.
I want to go back to that real quick. Just because this defense, if Jim uses the same defense that we have, doesn't use a zero tech nose tackle. It's a 1 to 3 shade, and so that's why guys like DJ Jones, like the Broncos, are a little light in the backside. You know what I mean? Yeah. DJ's like at 305, so it's a 1 to 3 shade there. So I think Deion, even though he is built more like or has the weight of a 0, but he plays more like a 1 to 3, I think is a perfect fit. I wanted him here in Denver, to be honest with you. I was upset when we did get him. Who did you want me to do on the career? Finish their career?
So the question was on PJ Locke, but I think obviously similarly trajectory wise, Singleton and Locke are very similar there. Where I think all things equal, they prefer to just finish things out in Denver. Singleton probably the clear path to starting again next year, but you could tell me that. But Locke was the one that was interesting to me. Where like, hey, if it was even money to be the third safety again in Denver, maybe to start in Buffalo, could that be enough to entice him?
I think he would take the starting job. And matter of fact, I think a lot of these guys that we're about to talk about are not going to be back here in Denver next year.
Okay.
JFM is one of them. He won't be back. They're just not going to pay. They paid that entire defense, and they're getting to the point where you're a year and a half. You're one full season away from having to pay Bo. So they're they're like, this is the window. As far as the rest of it goes, yeah, JFM, PJ, I think those guys are going to be gone. Alex Singleton probably going to be gone. And it gives, there's some bodies there that could be
Yeah.
options. PJ,
I don't
TJ's a
know that
guy
any of
that
them
like,
are long-term solutions for this, but when you're talking about that transition year
mhm.
where you can probably only splurge at one spot, you probably can't you're not gonna go get a really dynamic edge rusher and a Zach Bond and a high end safety. Like you maybe we splurge at one spot, so you may need to plug in. Hey, if we're going to plug in a guy, let's get a safety who knows the secondary and a linebacker who can direct everybody. Like that, that could be really more impactful for that transition year.
Yeah, and I think so. And Alex Singleton's the guy who lined everybody up in Denver. So that's one of those things, like, I wouldn't be surprised to see if maybe that move gets made. We'll see. PJ Locke again, yeah, I think he could be. And PJ, it's weird because he's really productive as more as a rotational safety. But then when you put him in for longer stretches, he sort of gets exposed a little bit for where his shortcomings are. He played better down the stretch this year than he did in the previous years, though. So maybe it just finally clicked for him this year. But he's a guy that has talent. I mean, he has talent. And when he was in that third rotational role, boy, he was all over the place. Like, he was making moves all over the place. When he started starting, was it last year or whatever for Denver? It wasn't all that good. And then this year he was the rotational guy again. It started to get good. And then when he had to come on when Brandon Jones got hurt, it wasn't bad at all. Teams kind of went after him a little bit early, but he held his own. There were two guys that did that this year, both of which could be gone. PJ and Jaquan McMillan of the slot
Okay.
corner. Now he's restricted. We'll see if they bring him back because they drafted Jade Barron. We'll see. But both those guys, I think acquitted themselves well this year after the team was kind of lower on them by the end of last year.
Yeah, I think my ideal scenario would be you have a PJ Lock on a 2-year solid deal and a day two pick. And
Yeah.
you have that as like, hey, so Cole Bishop and then those two, and those are your three safeties. And like, hey, if the younger guy gets ready and it's just a lot of snaps there, we don't know the future for Taron Johnson. Where does that fit? Is he a fit does he have the size for what they're looking for in that like nickel overhang, extra guy? Is that going to work from that standpoint? There's some curious things there. Where are your thoughts on Justin Sternad? He's a guy that I like coming out of the draft, and then it was maybe a bit of a slow start, and now all of a sudden there were some flashes, and that's always an interesting time to hit free agency where there hasn't been huge production, but there's been moments where it looks like there could be something there. Obviously, price tag's always gonna decide a lot of those things. Where are you on Justin Sternad as a possible actual play in play out starter?
Well, let me start off by saying everybody loves the guy, right? Everybody loves him. Fan favorite, locker room favorite. Everybody loves him. Injuries in season have derailed him over and over again. It's just been one thing after another where he's had one little injury here, one little injury there. It just kind of derails any momentum he gets. But I will say when he's out there, he's productive. Perfect in that spot that I talked about earlier, that he can go sideline to sideline or downhill. You really don't want him going away from the ball, but the sideline to sideline and downhill, yeah, he can play that in this defense, what would be called the will. He can be that. He can be that guy. And this defense, I will say, if Jim Leonhard runs what they run here, the stress is on the corners because they're going to be on an island a lot, and the stress is on the linebackers because they have to read and react real quick on what it is that's going on. Everybody else, I mean, it's not stress free. It's the NFL, but those are the stress points in the defense. If your corners can't hold up on an island, you're sunk anyway. And if your linebackers can't read and react, you're just going to get run on all over the place. So that's really, he's one of those guys that understands this defense and it's instinctive to him. So that might be something that if you can get him on the right money deal, might be huge for a team like Buffalo.
Yeah. And obviously we don't have a Patrick Surtain, but I'm reasonably comfortable at least finding out Christian Benford and a full go with Max Hairston. I'm at least good with, hey, we've got the potential for that to fit. I think that's at least something for Leonard to start with. It's certainly lower on the ranking of needs. Cornerbacks at least one that we can kind of check the box at. Okay, game one, I think we're going to be in good shape there. Obviously, make some adjustments from a depth standpoint, but there's a lot of other ones where that other safety spot, all the linebacker spots, the style of edge rusher going from a lot of those like Epinesa, Bosa, Gregory Rousseau types, that's I think I saw Eric Turner with us here was looking. I think that Cooper and Benito dropped between twice or three times as much as any of our guys did. And
Probably.
not that they're dropping all the time, but just we don't have any of those, like the tweener for a long time was a derogatory term, and now it's kind of a like a positive with the versatility. We don't have any tweeners. We have none of those guys who have that kind of versatility to them. So, and that's sadly not a cheap thing to go out and get.
No, it's not, and that's the one thing that when you do find those guys, you got to be careful because they need to be able to set the edge in the run game. They still got to be able to run their passer, but it also makes you a little light. Makes you a little light up front, and that's one of those things like you become susceptible to being run on with power run games. So Benito's one of those rare specimens that can go away from the ball and rush at a great level. So that's having him is kind of a boon when you add him and Sertan. It kind of makes teams go the other direction.
Yeah, so we'll see where it goes. Obviously, there's a lot of things the Bills need to hit on with some picks here. They need to be able to identify some of the opportunities. But I think some of their short-term names, I'll be honestly pretty surprised if at least one of those guys we talked about tonight doesn't end up on the Bills here. I think there's a lot of logical connections, whether it's them looking for spots. When you're looking for spots, you go to coaches that you go to coaches that who might have an open starting spot and might have an open starting spot where there's value of you coming in and helping do some of that kind of internal education and mentoring and coaching to get the other guys up to speed. That's just a lot of dots to connect there that I think that we could see a small handful of those guys make their way over here.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see two or three of them. So.
All right, man. Well, thank you very much. Always very gracious with your time. Appreciate talking to you. Hopefully, we'll get some fun games to get back to here, but in the short term, we appreciate it all the same. So make sure you guys check it out. Go and find Ben. You can find him on that Twitter machine. Always, having a good time at Allbright NFL and over at KO Colorado, giving all the folks there a good time. So appreciate everything. On behalf of our team here at Cover One, I am Greg Thompson. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.